to continue. The agenda today would be to give a brief overview of Capitalize Albany, who we are, what we do, existing grant programs, give an overview of this big program that y'all are interested in applying for, a program description, talking through applicant eligibility and project eligibility, and then we'll go through the round one timeline and a Q&A at the end. Like I said, through the chat box, we'll answer some Q&As and we'll get going. And so Renee, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Ashley said, I'm Renee McFarland. I'm a senior economic developer with Capitalize Albany, and we are going to get started with who is Capitalize Albany and what do we do. So Capitalize Albany's mission is to facilitate strategic economic development, stimulate transformative investment throughout the city, and make New York's capital a vibrant place to live. So what does that mean about what we actually do? So Capitalize Albany is the City of Albany's economic development organization. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we manage all of the local economic development functions to help stimulate transformative investments. Our organization is engaged in business development, real estate development, and strategic development. So this includes implementing programs and resources that create, retain, and attract businesses in the city, like our small business grant programs that we're going to talk about today, as well as we staff the Industrial Development Agency and Capital Resource Corporation. So we are here today to talk primarily about our new big program. But I'm going to share a little bit of the other information so that you know that we are here to help in other ways. So we do work on other strategic projects like Skyway depicted here. We also work extensively with local and state agencies, departments, other community partners, and we're always here to help businesses connect with those entities. So if you ever have questions about anything and you're not quite sure where to go, just reach out to us. We might not be the ones who have the answer or your final stop, but we will always try to move you forward to the right place. Other ways we help support growth and development in the city include administering tools. I mentioned the Industrial Development Agency and the Capital Resource Corporation a little earlier. So those are really tools that help to facilitate construction projects so they can help support costs with like acquiring, constructing, improving, maintaining and equipping eligible projects. So if you ever have a development project that you think you might be interested in or eligible for Industrial Development Agency or Capital Resource Corporation support, just give us a call and we can talk you through that. One of the other functions that we have is that we help obtain and provide letters of support for grant applications. And we also serve as the local coordinator for the state's consolidated funding application process and other initiatives. So if you are applying for a New York State Council on the Arts grant and you are looking for a letter of support from the city or from Capitalize Albany, just reach out to us and we can work with you on that. So as the city's economic development agency, we do know that small businesses are critical to our economy. We are going to provide a quick overview of our existing small business programs and tell you a little more about what we do with those. We have a long history of supporting our small businesses through a number of grant programs. We have capital grants programs that are ongoing, like downtown retail and neighborhood retail for things like interior fit up and exterior improvements like signs and things like that. We've also historically run the Small Business Facade Improvement Program for exterior improvements to qualifying businesses and not-for-profits. I do have a couple of photos on the slide. One of the projects that we did under the facade improvement program is the photo on the right, Lark Hall. We helped to assist with new signage and facade improvements and upgrades there. We do have a fourth program that is not a capital improvement program, and I'm only going to mention it briefly because it is a really fun program and we do have a lot of interest in it. It's called Amplify Albany. So you can see from the photo of Rocktoberfest, one of the things we can do with funding through Amplify Albany is to support local events and community initiatives, really in commercial corridors to get people out into the community and walking through our neighborhoods. In addition to the programs that we have right now, we have run a couple of one-time programs, including the Small Business Adaptation Program. This was a program that was really developed with the city to help support our small businesses through COVID-19. So I'm going to give you a little background on that just because it's going to help provide some context for the big grant program. So we, with the city, have been engaged from day one of COVID-19 to support our small businesses. When Capitalize Albany started the Small Business Adaptation Program, which we'll also refer to as SBAP because Small Business Adaptation Program is a lot of words to say at once. SBAP provided grant funding to assist with recovery efforts for our small businesses by awarding grants to support resuming regular operations, meeting new regulatory requirements, and strengthening or expediting growth and recovery for our small businesses. We did cover a number of eligible expenses that were critical to supporting the businesses at the time, and BIG really kind of builds off of that SBAP program. So, program description, a little background. In March of 2021, the mayor convened a COVID-19 task force. This was put together so that our local stakeholders and experts in all different areas like public health, workforce, housing, and small businesses could really convene and talk about the issues that the COVID-19 pandemic wrought on all of those different areas. The result of that task force was a report published in August of 2021, which really set the standard for how any process moving forward would strategize and prioritize potential projects throughout the city. So the city received funding through the American Rescue Plan Act that they identified some portion of it to utilize for potential community projects that would be prioritized through that task force report's recommendations. That was through Albany for All. And in, I believe it was May of 2022, the city awarded funding for some of those projects. They did provide $1.5 million to support small businesses in the city of Albany. So Capitalize Albany Corporation, as well as the Central Avenue bid and Downtown bid were the recipients of that funding. So our program was born out of that, as well as long-term strategic plans that the city had. The big program, I'll give you the sort of quick snapshot on it, will provide reimbursable grants to assist with paying costs associated with capital investments, including renovations and purchases of machinery and equipment for eligible small businesses and not-for-profits. Our program really is about purchasing things or paying to have things, physical things installed. There is another program out there that I don't want to forget to mention. I'm going to plug right now, and I think that the director of the Central Avenue bid is on with us so that he can tell you what that program does. It is the Small Business Vitality Assistance Program. Thank you for joining us, Anthony. I appreciate it.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'll be brief. And in a lot of ways, their program is there to assist the same types of businesses. We're going through a process right now. We have quite a few applications in for everything from back bills, back rent, things that you may have experienced during COVID that put you behind the 8 ball. And we're trying to work through that process right now to get people and spread our dollars out as far as we can to assist businesses and give them a leg up in recovery. We also have some funds available in the different, the word tranches keeps coming up, in the 3 different phases of our program. And we're going to try to stretch this out as far as we can, but the need is great. And if you are interested, you can go to businessvitalityalbany.org and fill out the intake form. And it's really important because we've already seen people come through our program intake and they're really looking for capital expenditures. So we're referring them to Capitalize Albany's program. And, you know, even if it's something as small as a wide carriage printer or something very, you know, sophisticated, up to, I don't know, up to $25,000 in a capital expenditure, we think that's a better fit. So ours is really COVID recovery, specific expenses, back rent, back utilities, and technical assistance. We have a lot of people that are going to be looking for business planning, also looking for trying to get some training, technical experience, and some upgrades in technology to make them more profitable. So we have a wide window to work with, but a smaller amount of money as we go through the process. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to our office at 518-462-4300, and or go right to the website and check it out from there. I'll post it in the chat if that's okay with you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about the goals of the BIG program. Again, really guided by the COVID task force report, long-term strategies, but also through our experience talking with small businesses and the impacts that SBAP funding had on them when we had more flexible opportunities to acquire or improve their spaces and businesses. So I'm not going to read verbatim because it's very texty, but really we want to support small businesses and eligible not-for-profits by offering the flexible funding necessary to support operations and growth, diversify small business ownership, and goods and services offered throughout the city. We also want to create low barrier to entry jobs and leverage public and private investment throughout the city to revitalize and improve our image by facilitating new investments, including, you know, the occupation of vacant space. And the ultimate goal is really to enhance vibrancy and help increase foot traffic in our neighborhoods. So our strategic priorities with the BIG program. What are the strategic priorities and what does this mean? So if you submit an application through the BIG program, through our 2-step application process, and you have one or more of the components listed here, they will help with your application when we're reviewing it, as far as, you know, favorably scoring them and things like that. I am going to go through these real quick. So the first strategic priority we have is businesses that are disadvantaged business enterprises. This is typically a woman-owned business, a minority or a veteran-owned business. We are choosing to use a more inclusive definition of socially disadvantaged business owners. The SBA has some regulations advising on what those might be. There is a link to that SBA definition in the program guidelines. And if you need it, you can always give us a call and we can send that to you. The other strategic priority right now is qualified census tracts. So qualified census tracts are census tracts that are determined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, to meet certain criteria as far as median income levels and things like that. So they're typically more disinvested areas, and we would like to prioritize investments in those places. We also have businesses with a storefront open to the public. So not all businesses under our program are required to have a storefront open to the public. However, your application will be looked at more favorably if you do have one. We're also looking for businesses that provide desired or complementary service. So you see a number of business types here that you've probably heard about before. People talking about needing childcare facilities, needing more grocery and fresh foods, especially in certain neighborhoods. We're looking for more hospitality-oriented businesses, soft good retailers, like clothing retailers and shoe retailers, things like that. Health and wellness stores and pharmacies, as well as salons, spas, and barbershops. Another strategic priority is businesses that manufacture a physical product for sale. So these aren't, typically going to be big manufacturers who produce like large machining equipment. It can be as long as you meet the other eligibility criteria. But what we were thinking when we were looking at strategizing these priorities, your small business that maybe operates, from the Steam Garden or a place like that, that, makes candles or soaps. We have a number of those small businesses in the city. Maybe they sell at markets, maybe they have an Etsy storefront, things like that. So producers are identified as a strategic priority. Finally, we have listed businesses that are moving to a space that's been vacant for a year or more. Again, looking at the goals of the program, trying to reactivate those vacant spaces throughout our city. In addition to these strategic priorities, there are other components of the application that we will be scoring on, and I want to mention them so that you have an idea as you're thinking through what you're going to write in your application. These are on page 9 of the program guidelines, but I'll just give you a quick idea. So we're looking for applications that align with our program's goals and meet eligibility requirements. We're going to be looking at the completeness of your application, the size of your project, and its potential impact on a business's operations. So for example, we have a couple restaurants, they might make their own sauces. Essentially, are you applying for funding that's going to allow you to increase your capacity and therefore make your revenue more sustainable by giving you a jarring machine or a canning machine or something like that so that you can make the operation more efficient? Another thing we'll be looking at is the aesthetic, community, or strategic impact. So are your improvements likely to bring foot traffic into the neighborhood? By calling attention with a new facade, will it potentially incentivize your nearby business owners to make similar investments and make the street more vibrant? Or is it a complementary business? Are you in a place that doesn't have a salon for, in a mile radius? And would you be a salon that could potentially bring additional foot traffic over to that part of the neighborhood? Applications that address like correcting building code violations, address compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act issues, or create barrier-free access, and preserving historically significant architecture. Those are also things that we'll be looking for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emma, and she's going to walk you through some more of the specifics of the program.
Thank you, Renee. So kind of as a reminder, the tracks of funding that we're talking about are going to be available for reimbursable grants for capital improvements, so building improvements, fixed interior and exterior, as well as furniture, machinery, and equipment acquisitions. We are offering 2 tracks of funding. So the first one is going to be micro grants of $1,500 to $4,999. We're calling this track 1 of funding. We are very excited to be able to offer 100% reimbursement for grants under this track with no match requirement for our grantees. So if you apply and are awarded $4,000 for the purchase and installation of a new piece of equipment or a new sign, once you submit the required closeout documentation, including proof of purchase, and show that you spent the $4,000, we would reimburse $4,000. So again, we are really excited about being able to do 100% reimbursement for that micro grant track. The second track of funding is major project grants. These are from $5,000 to $25,000. This is track 2 of funding. These will be reimbursed at up to 90% of eligible project costs with a 10% match required from our grantees. So if you apply for a $10,000 project for the purchase and installation of a new sign and new storefront windows, you could be awarded up to $9,000. Once you go through the project, submit the required closeout materials and documentation that you spent $10,000, we would reimburse you at 90% and up to that $9,000. So who is eligible to apply for the big program? We're definitely getting a lot of questions about this. So the first thing I really want to highlight is that all applicants must be currently operating or committed to operating within the city of Albany. If your mailing address is Albany, but you pay taxes to the town of Colony, for example, you would not be eligible for the big program. If you are opening a new storefront that's located within the city of Albany, but you haven't yet opened your doors to the public, that would count as being committed to operating a business within the city of Albany. Additionally, there's a bunch of things on this slide. I'm not going to read everything, but all applicants must be current on all taxes. So in the application process, you're going to certify that you are current on all taxes, federal, sales tax, state taxes. We are going to confirm that local property taxes are up to date. Generally, small businesses are eligible so long as they are not identified in the list of ineligible businesses, which we'll talk about on the next slide and is also listed in the program guidelines. For not-for-profit organizations, they must operate in the childcare, arts and cultural, tourism, or hospitality industries and have a publicly accessible and street-facing entrance. There are additional full-time equivalent requirements associated with both types of entities. Small businesses must have no more than 50 full-time equivalent employees, and not-for-profits must have no more than 25 full-time equivalent employees. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So for the full-time equivalent employees, all right, I lost my notes there. So calculating full-time equivalents employees can be confusing and tricky, and please know that we are here to help you resolve this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us by email. We've tried to provide an example here. This is the first time we've done it in a webinar, so please give us, happily we'll take the feedback. We know this is a kind of confusing equation to look at. So first, what is a full-time equivalent employee? A full-time equivalent employee can be one single full-time position, or it can be multiple part-time positions that when combined equate to the hours worked by a single full-time position. So how do I calculate my number of full-time equivalent employees? So let's say that your business has a total of 55 total employees, and you're not sure if you're going to be eligible under the small businesses having 50 or fewer small full-time equivalent employees. So to calculate your full-time equivalent employee count, let's say you have 35 full-time employees and 20 part-time employees. Your part-timers could work inconsistent hours, but together they average 15 hours per week. And if your business considers 40 hours per week to be full-time, then how we would calculate this is we'd determine the total number of hours worked by part-time employees. So that would be your 20 part-time employees times the average, 15 hours. So you'd have 300 hours total worked by part-time employees. You're going to divide that total hours worked by the number of hours you consider to be full-time. So in this example, we had 300 hours worked by all part-time employees divided by 40 hours, which your business considers to be full-time. That's going to give us 7.5 full-time equivalent employees out of those 20 part-time employees. So to get the total number, you're going to add your full-time employees, which we had 35 in this example, and then your full-time equivalent from the part-timers, so that's 7.5, and we'd have 42.5 total full-time equivalent employees. So for this example, you have 55 total employees. You might think, oh no, I'm not going to meet the definition of small businesses, but once you do the full-time equivalent calculation, you are actually at 42.5 total full-time equivalent employees. So you would be eligible for the big program. All right. So there are some program requirements for the big program. Again, I'm not going to read through every single one. These are listed in our program guidelines, and we will share the slides of this as a recording after this as well, so you can refer back to it. I am going to call out a couple of program requirements. So first, businesses and organizations under the big program. So if they receive grants, they are required to be open and operating a minimum of 24 hours per week. The definition of open and operating could change depending on the business or organization type. So for example, if you make jewelry and you sell it online and at markets, you would have to be manufacturing your jewelry, packaging shipments, or at markets a minimum of 24 hours per week. If you're making the jewelry out of your house, we understand you wouldn't have a storefront that is open 24 hours a week, but your business would be open and operating at that minimum of 24 hours a week. Another requirement is you will need to find out if your project is going to require a certificate of occupancy. So those are issued by the city, as part of a buildings inspection. So if you are doing, renovations, if you're fitting up a new storefront in a new building, if you require certificate of occupancy, that will be required as part of this program. So you'll need to check in with the planning department or the buildings department to see what other kind of inspections are needed for the work, but we do require you to be in compliance with the city requirements there. Applicants additionally, if they're applying for building improvements, the use of the business organization must be in conformity with any zoning requirements. So with any questions here, feel free to reach out to us. We can refer you to the city planning or buildings department. Grantees must commit to maintaining the improvements or investments in place for a period of 2 years. Couple other requirements that I'm going to kind of go through quickly. We have a standard media release, so that enables us to use photos of your project or your business in our materials. We do ask that our grantees invite us to any publicity events, include us in press releases, identify support from the big program on signage in the store. There's also some standard contract language in our grant agreements. So we're happy to talk through any of those questions in more depth. Generally, that comes up kind of after the time of award. All right, so ineligible applicants. The list of ineligible applicants is here on the slide as well as in the program guidelines. If you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to us by phone or email. We also encourage you to go ahead and submit the step 1 of the application process, the intake and eligibility form online. That's available through our website at www.capitalizealbany.com/grants. Go ahead and submit that step 1 intake and eligibility form. Please don't rule yourself out of the program without speaking to us. So we are always happy to talk with any questions, but this is what that step 1 is for. So, don't rule yourself out just because you think you might be ineligible. Talk to us first. All right, so now we'll talk about the kind of projects that are eligible. So as Renee mentioned before, generally the big program is going to be for capital improvements and investments in furniture and machinery and equipment acquisitions. We are really excited. This is the first time for one of our grant programs that we've been able to support all businesses throughout the city, both new and existing businesses, doing interior and exterior work, as well as incorporating that machinery and equipment. And that is really important to us based on the feedback we've heard from talking to our small businesses over the last many years. For the capital improvement projects, so those fixed interior or exterior improvements, this could be like putting up walls, taking down walls, interior, exterior painting, new signage. For the furniture, machinery, and equipment acquisitions, a couple examples would be, the electronic point of sale systems and the equipment needed for that. The purchase of any kind of kitchen appliances for a restaurant or, say, shelving systems. Applications for both of applications will be reviewed on the criteria Renee mentioned earlier. So those are listed in the program guidelines, but that's the kind of information, like if you're looking for machinery equipment, we will review your application based on the extent to which this investment supports increasing the efficiency, capacity of the business or establishes new product lines. So again, feel free to review the program guidelines to understand kind of what will be reviewing applications based on. We'll also be providing a second webinar to talk about the application process. So ineligible expenditures, probably the most important one. It's a question we get all the time. Pre-award costs are going to be ineligible for reimbursement or inclusion in total project cost for the purpose of the big program. So any funds spent on a project, so say if you order something today, anything you spend before you receive an award, before you receive a specific award letter, will not be considered eligible and will not be considered towards your total project size. So that is one thing, we see all the time. We understand that you are eager to get started on your projects. However, for the purposes of this grant program, you do need to wait until you receive an award notification, not just submit an application, in order to have those costs be eligible. Speculative investments are not eligible under the BIG program. So you must either be a tenant with a signed lease going into a space, or if you're applying as a building owner, applying on behalf of a tenant with a signed lease, you can't do it in hopes of attracting a tenant. We are not able to do acquisition of any land or buildings, purchases of a business. We are not able to fund any working or operating capital. A note on the in-kind or donated services. So those do not count towards that match. So that 10% match that we talked about for the major project grants cannot include sweat equity or donated services. That has to be a match in actual funds by the part of the grantee. These final 3 ineligible expenditures, I specifically wanted to call out because these are things that can be funded under the Small Business Vitality Assistance Program run through the Central Ave Business Improvement District and the Downtown Business Improvement District. So that COVID-19 related debt, there are scholarships available for entrepreneurial education and the technical assistance for things like drawing up new contracts for a business, coming up with a employee handbook. That funding is not available under the BIG program, but it is available under the Small Business Vitality Assistance Program. All right, so I'm going to pass this back to Renee to go over kind of the grant timeline and what happens from here on out.
Thank you. So we are having a webinar next week at the same time to go over the application process and a little bit about the post-award process more in depth. But we wanted to give you an idea of where things are going and a visualization of it. So step number 1, the intake and eligibility forms. Those are due February 10th. And then step number 2, the project questionnaires and required documents are due on February 17th. I'll go into a little more depth on the next slide about that. But those are our dates for right now for deadlines. After you submit your applications, we'll review them. And then after our review and scoring process, we'll send out award letters. Following that, we will compile your grant agreements, which are the contracts that Emma was referring to earlier, and required exhibits. So, you know, if you have to provide us with insurance information and things like that. After we get those out, you guys will sign them, execute them, provide us with any required documentation, and then the contract will be signed and you can start your project. So whether you're buying a piece of equipment and having it installed, or if you're hiring a contractor to come out and do some exterior work, or you're ordering a sign, things like that, that would all happen. And then after you complete your project, you would submit your documentation that Emma referred to earlier, which would be your project completion report, your reimbursement requests with the copies of your proofs of payment and things like that. And then when we receive it, we'll do a review. You know, we may have to come back for additional information, but generally our objective with providing reimbursements on these grants is to get the funding to our grantees as soon as we can. We know that these are big investments for our small businesses and small not-for-profits. You know, we try to acknowledge that and get things completed quickly. So like I mentioned, it's a 2-step application process. A couple of things I want to say to give everyone a better overview or picture of this. So these grants are not first come, first served. So even if you submit your full application tomorrow, we're not going to review it until after the application deadline. The next thing I want to share is that step number 1, even though the due date is February 10th, we encourage everyone to submit those as quickly as possible, because we will not be able to provide you with access to the full application until we review your intake and eligibility form. So if you wait until the 10th, which is a Friday night, then you won't get that link to the full application until at least the following Monday, which only gives you a few days to get the application completed and submitted. So in that vein, as I mentioned, we're having a webinar next week to go over the application process in more detail. However, if you already have your application link or you get your application link in the coming days, I strongly recommend that you open that application and start taking a look through it, partially because if you're going through it and you have a question, then you can submit that in advance of the webinar and we can address it at the webinar. And chances are, if you have that question, there could be a couple of other people who have that question too. So this way we can share the information with the whole group and make sure that everything is clear. Another note about the application, and this is really pertaining to step number 2. So it's going to be a project questionnaire, and there's going to be required documentation that you will upload in the online application. But know that once you get to the end of that application and you hit submit, we will no longer be able to provide technical assistance or answer your questions on the application. So if you have any questions or you're unsure about anything at all, just pick up the phone and give us a call. We would be more than happy to clarify those things before you submit the application. And then a final note on this is that we won't be able to review incomplete applications. So please make sure that you've got all of your required documentation, everything matches on the application, that you're not asking for, you know, $2,000 in one place and $5,000 in another place, and that all your questions are answered before you hit that submit button. And as you can see on the screen, we do have a visual of what the program information application process looks like for step number 1. So if you click on the link on our website to fill out that intake and eligibility form, it should take you to this page. If it does not take you to this page, then please let us know, give us a call, and we can get you to the right place. So as we said earlier, we are happy to take questions. Please type them into the chat box. We will either answer them live. If we don't get to them right now, we'll include them in a frequently asked questions document that'll be uploaded on the Capitalize Albany website. And we are going to just put ourselves on mute for a second, take a look at the questions that have come in, and we'll strategize how to answer all of the excellent questions that you guys are sending.
While Emma and Renee are looking at the questions, I will just say one more time, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on our website shortly after the conclusion of this webinar. So it'll be available for folks to look back through. The webinar that we do next week, that will also be recorded, that will be also posted. So you can go back, you know, fast forward, look at different parts and listen to it again. We will also, like I said, post a frequently asked questions document that will include some questions that are common questions from all the programs that we have. Just because we know that's sort of where everybody's questions sort of lie usually. And then we'll include these questions that we receive here today with sort of the formal responses on them in shorthand. From what we probably say on the webinar for folks to reference. So those will be posted up shortly, hopefully by the end of this week, but if not, as soon as possible next week.
Okay, so the first question that we have is, can it be a security system or safety equipment? So I would say that that depends, which is not as clear of an answer as I'm sure you want. But for everyone's purposes, the way we would look at that is it installed as a fixture on the building? That'll be one of the considerations with funding safety equipment or security equipment. Or is it integral to the organization or business's operations? I can't come up with an example offhand of how the security system would be integral to your business operations. Potentially, if you're a childcare facility and you need that kind of security equipment, we would look at that differently than if you're a standard business and that's what you're applying for. That being said, for this specific example and others, there's always the option, if you're applying for a major project grant, to include it in your total project budget. And the funds that are required to make that purchase and installation could be included as part of your 10% match. And potentially there's other eligible expenses that we could cover.
I'd just like to jump in and add to Renee's response a couple of other disclaimers. This program is for $1,500 up to $25,000. So if it's under that $1,500 mark, I haven't priced out security systems. I have to imagine it's probably over that. But if it was under that $1,500 mark, that technically wouldn't be eligible for this program. The minimum requirements there. If you paired it with an additional eligible expense, that could get you up to the mark where the total project cost would be in the eligible category potentially. Should we consider that eligible? Always talk with staff. I would say you make the case for it in your application. There's places where you can have narrative and you talk about why it's a necessity for your business. So you make the strongest case you can for why the things you are asking for are necessary for your business, and that's what we'll review. We'll compare them against the other applications in a competitive process, depending on how much funding is requested in total, how many applicants, and the available funding. That will determine how nitty-gritty and competitive it has to get on the scoring as to whether the equipment purchase is its strategic impacts on the business, the neighborhood, the city, all of that type of stuff. The more competitive and the more requests we get in, the more we'll have to factor in those strategic impacts in the community and consider that as part of whether we fund the request or not, and whether we get to that level of request.
Thank you. Anything else on that one?
Renee, I think we skipped an earlier question, maybe up at the top, that was about sales tax.
Oh, I apologize. I thought that was a second question. It is on my list as the second question.
Okay.
So to apply for a grant for equipment, is the purchase price with or without tax included? The purchase price would include the tax.
For the purpose of this program, we do include sales tax as an eligible part of the expense. It does make it a heck of a lot easier for us and for the grantees for us to just pay out the full amount. We do have one of our other grant programs where sales tax is not included. That is a separate program. And we are looking at potentially maybe in the future someday that becomes something we fund under that program too, just to make everybody's lives easier.
There was a question about going over nonprofits. So that was before we talked about eligible nonprofits. As a quick reminder, it's nonprofits in the arts, cultural, tourism, hospitality, and childcare industries. You must have 25 or less FTEs, and you must have a publicly accessible and open storefront. Now, I don't know if that answers all of your questions, Laura. You can jump off mute if you have a follow-up, or we can follow up later specifically.
I think I wrote a little bit more clearly. For nonprofits, we do have a childcare program, but Salvation Army is also known for feeding the hungry and, food pantry, soup kitchens, case management, youth programs. We do have music and arts programs for youth. And so, we're not just a childcare, we're not just a music and arts. So does that make us still eligible?
Yes. So what I would say, and this would go for any of the nonprofits, and could potentially apply to some small businesses. If you have an eligible component, then the things that you are requesting funding for should be directly tied to that component of the organization or the business. I understand that there could be some things that may end up spreading between your eligible component and your ineligible component. We'll look at those in a couple different ways. Sometimes we'll do a pro rata share. So the portion that could be directly attributable to the eligible not-for-profit component, we would fund that, but we would maybe not fund anything related to the ineligible component. But those are going to be very like specific case by case determinations. So if you think you're running into that, give us a call so we can talk it out, or send us an email, and we can give you better guidance on what would give you the most competitive application.
Yeah, certainly we can help talk you through the budget components and presenting the most competitive budget. And I think as staff has said, at the end of the day, sometimes it's worthwhile, like one, the phone call and talking with us, but two, sometimes it's even worthwhile to submit it and ask, because you can't receive if you don't ask. I mean, we do want you to follow our program guidelines, hence having the webinar and walking you through the rules and requirements and things like that. But when it comes to eligible uses and things like that, it might not be something we've contemplated previously. So until we see it, we can't actually consider that as a potential use. So I'd say make your argument, make your case in your application, and it at least gives us an opportunity to take a look at it and see if it's something that we can include in the program. Because this program is super flexible. It's probably one of the most, if not the most flexible programs that we've done to date. The only one that's close was the small business adaptation program that we did as our first initial COVID response. And then this one's probably, either above that or second to that in terms of flexibility. So we did talk through a lot of rules, but really this is as super flexible as funding that can come from the city can usually get. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible for folks.
Like Ashley said, make a compelling case, but no's are free. So you might as well ask for it.
Love that.
Yes, that's one of my favorite sayings, especially if you're in the grants world like we are. Next question is, if you are under payment agreement with the state for taxes, are you unable to apply? So we did specifically discuss this before we launched the program. Yes, as long as you can certify that you are up to date on those payments, that you have that payment plan, then yes, you are eligible. And if you have specific questions or you think you're not sure, again, call us or shoot us an email.
Yes, we would consider that being in compliance because you're in an official arrangement with either the federal government or the state government. You're on a payment plan. If you can certify that you have one of those in place, we would consider you current for the purposes of this program.
Yes, innumerable small businesses are on payment plans for their taxes. We completely understand that. If applying for BIG, can you also apply for Vitality to help cover those expenses as well? Absolutely. These are two separate programs. The only place where we could conceivably run into an issue is if you ask for the purchase of something that the Small Business Vitality Program could agree to cover. We cannot also cover it. You can only get that money from one source. And so that everyone knows, we will be in communication with the bids about that program, just to make sure that everyone is, getting all of the support that they need. Like Anthony mentioned, they get a lot of inquiries for capital grants. Make sure that everyone is getting what they're really looking for and what would be the most helpful. So the answer to that is yes.
Yes, and highly encouraged. Get the most assistance out there that you can. This level of assistance doesn't always come, and it's out there now. So get it while it's out there. Absolutely encourage folks to apply for everything they're eligible for that is out there currently and that will be in the future. no shame in asking when it's free.
Exactly. Let's see, I have one question that's a direct question that I think I'm going to have to answer offline about a real estate investor looking at the smaller grant program to complete a couple of projects. So just for some clarification, I think Emma touched on it earlier. Funds obtained through this program must be used to benefit an eligible small business or eligible not-for-profit under the program guidelines. So one of the uses, and this is not necessarily an answer to that question because I don't have enough information about the specific project, but know that the program guidelines say that passive real estate investment firms are ineligible. That'll be with the exception of, a real estate investment firm office that's open and accessible to the public and meeting the other requirements.
And I think there's a question that says, can this grant be used for pre-development costs such as drawings? I don't think Renee has answered that yet.
I have not.
So the answer to that is yes, that can potentially be an eligible expense. What we say in the guidelines is that those costs should be part of a comprehensive renovation project. So we wouldn't necessarily pay for architecture and engineering or design fees if you're not moving forward to the next step of doing those renovations at this point in time. We don't want necessarily plans or designs to sit on a shelf. As we can get criticized as an economic development entity, folks don't want to see us have plans sit on a shelf. So for the grant program, we can pay for those soft costs if they're part of a project that you're doing. So if you're doing a reno and an architect, does the renderings and does all the drawings for that kind of project, it's analyzed, it's assessed, we can pay those fees potentially as part of, part of your renovation in your capital project.
And keep in mind that you may only ask us for the funding to cover those costs for whatever reason. If it's part of a massive project that you're looking to do, include the full project in your application. The one note about that is that, we don't reimburse until the project costs are incurred. So if you have further specific questions about how we would work that out, get in touch with us offline and we can get some more detail and give you a better idea. We have a question about if a piece of equipment has optional features, can it be included for the micro grant? For example, a rechargeable battery instead of D batteries. Speaking sort of off the top of my head, so cut me off if you need to, Ashley, I would say that the answer is yes to that. The one sort of note that I'll put in there is it's much easier to do that if you can order that from the same vendor that you're ordering the actual piece of equipment from. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think, how do I want to say this? Your business best, right? We are not by any means trying to determine what is best used for a certain piece of equipment, certain thing out there. So talk to us, like we have no idea what you're talking about and explain why this is needed or why this is better. Maybe that's not needed for a rechargeable battery versus D batteries. But if there's something that's not explicitly clear as to why you need that for the piece of equipment or for the project, please do tell. Don't assume that we'll know that, because you'll know your operations better than us.
Yes.
And one other thing I'd love to add, it wasn't a question, but I didn't remember to include this earlier. So when we're talking about pieces of equipment, please also include the cost of installation. So we know that if you are ordering, a new gas range for your restaurant, you're going to have to pay someone to come and install that. That should be included as part of the project cost. That is an eligible cost. So if you need an electrician to install something, that's going to be, the same thing.
Thank you. Next question, can you apply for both grants under the micro and the major project track? The answer, unfortunately, is no. It's just a range of funding that we're making available for projects between $1,500 and $25,000. We divided it into the micro grant track number 1 and the major project grant track number 2 to offer the opportunity for those smaller projects to have the 0% match.
Yep, it's just the size of the project. So if it goes up over, or the size of the grant request, rather, if the grant request goes up over that $49.99 and goes up into the 5,000, that just kicks you up into the next threshold, and that will require a match. Just because once the investments get of a significant size, and the threshold we chose was 5,000, we do want to see the owners have, some of that cash in the project and that investment made in the project. We are past the 12 o'clock hour, so I do want to be conscious of everyone's time. We're just trying to look through the remaining questions and see what we can cover here today. But if you have any following up, please email them to development@capitalizealbany.com or call us at 518-434-2532 extension 1. And we can get those into the FAQs as well. I'm just seeing if there's, Renee, do you see any others?
So by my count, I don't see any more questions. So I'm going to say last call on questions for the purposes of this webinar, but again, just reach out if you have any.
Awesome. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you all so much.
And thank you for your interest in the program and your investment in the city of Albany continued.